for After the Bell Live. With special guests, Eric Crow, Merritt Dewhurst, Ron Dorsey, Gerald Lavelle, Yana Minchenko, and Gabrielle Wyring, with Gibson as the band. And by the way, I got Heelys on. Now here's your host, Nick and Amire.
Hello, my name's Nick. I'm 19 and I've been involved with the ICA for about 4 years.
Hi, I'm Amire. I'm 16 and this has been my second year on the Teen Arts Council. Tonight, for our show, we're going to be hosting a panel discussing in-school and out-of-school learning experiences. We're going to talk about their similarities and differences, how they can work together, and what they can learn from each other.
For our panel, we've gathered some of the best and brightest thinkers in museum and public education.
We want to know about our panelists and their involvement in arts and education, so we're going to grill them,
Saute them,
fry them,
put them in the toaster till the thing goes ding,
pickle them,
put them in an ice tray with a toothpick and eat them like an orange juice popsicle,
poach them,
put them in the toaster and go in the shower and forget that you put the toaster in the toaster that goes ding and then burn it.
But really, we're just going to have a discussion.
We also have games. Games like Pick a Topic from a Hat, where our contestants will pick a topic from a hat.
And at the end, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So start thinking.
We have a great show, so sit tight. Gibson, take us to break. Welcome back. On our panel today, we have selected people who each have a unique perspective on in-school and out-of-school learning experiences. We have an artist, a professor, an administrator, a teacher, a student, and some museum educators. But before we get started with our panel, let's take a few moments to let our panelists introduce themselves. Hello, guys. Thank you guys for being here. If you guys, we just go down the line here. Eric, you want to start?
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Crow. I am alumni of the ICA Teen Program. I just graduated high school, and follow me on Instagram. That is it.
My name is Merritt Dewhurst. I'm a professor at City College of New York, and I used to work at the Museum of Modern Art, where I ran all of their teen programs for a number of years, and I'm now the token adult with the Museum Teen Summit in New York City.
My name is Ron Dorsey, and I'm the Chief of Education for the City of Boston. This is the most fun I'm going to have all week, so I am going to enjoy this time. My job in the city as the Chief of Education is to set strategy for the city, create opportunities for learning innovation all the way from early learning through higher ed in school-based spaces and community-based spaces, so I'm excited about today's conversation.
I'm Yana Minchenko. I teach humanities at Urban Science Academy, 9th grade. I also co-coach spoken word slam team. I was appointed to declare that we did win this year. 2016, louder than a bomb, so the champions, please snap for them. The representatives are right there. First time on the panel, I'm very excited and looking forward for the process.
Yay, all right. I'm Gerald Lavelle from Texas. I'm an artist and an educator. I spent the last, I guess, about 6 years of my life at the Studio Museum in Harlem, where I ran teen programs there. And I like to say that I really specialize in innovative curriculum design and out of school and alternative or supportive educational environments. So that's me.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Wyrick, and I'm the Associate Director of Education here at the ICA. And what that really means is I get to oversee the amazing teen programs that happen here and work with all of these fabulous young people. I've spent the last 15, 20 years working in museums across the country, trying to figure out the best ways to make museums a space for young people to learn and thrive. So that's me.
Well, thank you all for sharing. It's great to learn a little bit more about each one of you before we begin. But why don't we start the dialogue portion of today's panel? So we've prepared some questions for the panelists, but just to keep in mind, this is an open discussion, so feel free to just jump in and share your ideas whenever you want to. So why don't we start with the first question? From your own perspective, what do you see as the main difference between in-school and out-of-school learning experiences? So anyone can begin.
I can begin. And as an educator, this is the topic of an important conversation. So in school and class, we're driven by grades, by tests, by projects, by deadlines, by terms, by semesters, by years, being seniors, being in college, a lot of pressure. But these spaces outside of school, they create the space where you can pause and you can work a lot and then pause again. So there are different dynamics, I believe, in how you perceive the spaces and what each kind of represents. So this is one of the perspectives I have for that.
I think also they provide like an opportunity for people to certainly develop different skills that might not be so much appreciated in a school environment. So for example, conversation, group conversations, when you're in classroom environment, you raise your hand. Sometimes when you're in an out of school environment, it's a little bit more relaxed. You get to kind of, sort of govern yourself a little bit better, I don't know.
I think one of the things we were talking about before the panel is just this idea that out-of-school spaces can be places where you can reinvent yourself. Whereas school, I think oftentimes, at least in my experience, I'm from Michigan, I went to school all the way through high school with pretty much the same people. So it was really hard to reinvent myself. You were saying like reintroduce yourself in a new way or to try on something new. And I think that's something that out-of-school places can provide. And also this idea that in out-of-school places, like I'm coming from New York City and where we have the most segregated school district in the country. And so museum spaces can be these places where you can learn to work with and understand people who are different from you, either economically, racially, culturally. You can learn about, different religions, different faith practices, different ways of seeing gender. And all of these things are such important learning spaces, but it's hard to have them when you're sitting in a desk in a row or confined to 35 minutes with the same young people that you know on a daily basis. So I think, as we were saying, like there's definitely pros and cons to each, but there's something about that sort of like fluidity and that intentional diversity that I think offers like a whole other set of learning.
As I had to think about the question, I think what I find disturbing is that there is a distinction between school time and out of school time. It's all learning time. And I think we have to figure out how to design a set of experiences for young people that are led by young people in the first place so that you can be self-directed about the learning. But where time is less rigid, space is less rigid, it's less didactic, it's more organic. When out-of-school time is working at its best, it's really creating a lot of different creative possibilities, possibilities to build social capital, possibilities for choice, and a number of other things. But school should be that too. And so I think that there's a lot of reform work in how we think about and how we design learning for school that actually needs to borrow from what out-of-school time is doing well, particularly in terms of youth development. I think in the standards-based education era, where we're very much about making sure that we hit the content marks and the knowledge mark, but I would argue that the out-of-school time sector knows a lot more about youth development, or at least emphasizes it in a greater way than school does, but we can't afford for there to be a dichotomy.
Go
Go ahead, Eric.
You can go ahead. You can, because it looks like you were going to follow up with.
Well, I was just going to say, building on that notion of agency, I would say. You know, a lot of the young people I've worked with here, and maybe Eric will agree or disagree with me, but a lot of the young people I've worked with here and other places around the country say that when they come to the museum, it's the first time that they feel like their voice is actually heard, that someone is listening to them instead of talking at them or giving them information. And so I think that notion of agency and power is a real shift in the way we think about education. I don't know, what do you think, Eric?
I can agree with that. Something about agency, I feel like a lot of time when I was in school, especially when I was younger, that I wasn't noticed. Because, I wasn't noticed. I was just like, I was just in school. I was like trying to get good grades. So like that led to me acting out a lot when I was younger, and I feel like that was like the only way that I would get noticed and that I would be remembered by my teachers. And like as I got older and I stopped acting out, I was like, all right, it doesn't matter to me whether or not I'm remembered in school or whatever. And then the thing that I found outside of school is that like it doesn't matter, and that's okay that it doesn't matter. But like also there's a bunch of other things that are going on outside of school. Like there's like so many things, and I feel like when you're just in school, you forget that the world is a way bigger place than it is. Like especially when you're a student at the time, like it's just hard to remember that you're part of something bigger. But I feel like that's also like changing because so many more people have access to the internet, and I did not when I didn't always have reliable internet connection when I was growing up. I still don't.
Well, so like since like we're talking about like sort of how like in-school education's this, out-of-school education's that, do you guys think like should art museums and schools form like a somewhat of a holistic partnership? Like in what ways do you guys think they're already doing that, and like how can we build on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Yana.
I can start. We've already been in the process of partnership with the ICA for 6 years, and it's one of the best partnerships for me as a professional, for my students, for me as an individual. I've gained so much perspective. So I am a big advocate for the partnership for sure. We've been evolving into a poetry club because we've gotten to learn about poetry through the teaching artists that worked with us. We've gone through different discussions about art exhibits that we would have not had a chance to think about, talk about humanities and the value in life, how art shapes who we are every day a little bit. How I love Eric's idea that it expands the boundaries of what you think your world is. And it's not only your communities, it's like the world gets so much greater because artists come from all over different experiences and connections. So I'm definitely, and for us it's free. Talking about schools, the Boston Public Schools have very little money to spend on arts. I was sharing it before the panel that we only have one art teacher, and she teaches art as an elective because she double majored in art and humanities. So if she leaves, there will be no art program. So an opportunity to come to the ICA is additional plug-in for art and how we can make art, talk about art, involve art in our lives, carry it on after schools. So I'm a big proponent for that.
Yeah. I think there's something too about, back to what Ron was saying about sort of thinking about learning as a whole, and this idea that museums can offer schools a way to think about sort of dismantling a little bit of those constraints and starting to like chip away at sort of the structures that many young people find alienating. And there's something about museums being able to do it more than other organizations because museums have this kind of like gravitas in the world, right? Like, oh, you go to the museum, that means you're chic, or you go to the museum and that means you know something. And so a museum can come into a school and into some kind of partnership and say like, actually like, here's a way to, this is how we listen to young people. Oh, that's what you said. Oh, and I follow up. Or here's how we do a youth-led project. Oh, we actually give them responsibility. Whereas I think a lot of schools, there's so many policies and constraints that they're not used to giving young people that kind of power and that kind of responsibility. But to see it happen in a museum, which is also like filled with really expensive objects and places where like, you know, fancy people go all the time, to see those places already flipping the script a little bit, it can serve as a model to schools to be like, actually, you know, what would happen if we, you know, kind of as Ron, you're sort of suggesting here, like, what would happen if we asked young people what creates the best learning experience for them? And what if we modeled our classrooms based on that? Or what if, I always have this dream, I'm a professor of education, right? So I teach people to be teachers. I always had this dream of what would happen if I was able to get teenagers to teach some of my college classes. So to teach teachers how to be teachers for themselves, right? Like what if we just tried these things? And I think museums are, especially with teen programs, are places where risks happen. And sometimes they fail and sometimes they succeed, and it's okay.
Yeah, I think the partnerships can look different too. You know, normally I think about partnerships in the way, you know, so like a lot of museums do send teaching artists into schools. You know, they'll take up residencies in, you know, in different public schools. So maybe they're there for, you know, once a week for however many weeks, things like that. But also when I think about partnerships, really, I think about the relationships that are being built between, you know, the museum staff or the education staff and then, you know, staff members at schools. So for example, you have a relationship, a partnership where you are able to constantly refer students, you know, to the ICA, you know, so just like if we have a program and, you know, there's a teacher or an administrator at the school who will always say, hey, you know, this is a great program. Hey, you know, this is what's going on at this museum. You know, that's a partnership to me as well.
Yes.
And that's really important.
I think we have to figure out the degree to which we want to formalize
Right.
the partnerships, because I think that there's a lot of proven value to it, but it's probably a set of dotted line relationships right now. And you've been very enterprising in what you've done, but at Urban Science Academy, you've created the opportunity. But the question is, do you have equally enterprising staff at Brighton High School and at some other places? So I think we want to figure out, how do we systematically allow for the opportunity? Not that everybody has to step through the door, but we want to create a constellation of opportunities where learning can be self-directed. And that takes a little bit of systems work, figuring out the resources that need to go behind it. I do think that we need the partnerships because the greater part of the expertise about the arts, not only the creative disciplines, but the technical and business aspects, live outside of the school building. And I actually think the arts education is incomplete if you aren't in the places, in the communities where art is being created and where there's dynamic interaction. You can spend the school time space and the instructional time really digging in on the craft and learning, but you've got to be in the places where the art lives to really understand and I think to add dimension to the learning that you're doing.
And just to add to that, we were talking about this a little bit before we came out. I think there's incredible value to museum school partnerships, and I absolutely think that it's true the whole day, and everyone who's involved in that young person's life as part of their education. I do think there is a little bit of a tension when schools and museums, I think all organizations, but schools and museums partner, because I think young people do value the fact that this is not a school space. So it's like, how do you develop that successful partnership where each component is retaining the positive aspects of their environment, but not changing the other so drastically that the benefits become equalized, I guess.
I feel like it also creates a moment of concern for like my perspective would be like, and now am I going to be graded on the stuff that I'm doing outside of school? And like, if I feel like I'm being graded on something, it like automatically like just kind of turns me off on it, which is like why I found a lot of success at my school, because it was like the grades weren't like, it was running on a competency-based program, which was like made me feel less pressured and made it and made my work feel equally as valued. Whereas like if I wasn't getting an A in class on a project that I did, then that was like it for me for the year. Like I wouldn't want to do anything else.
So then we've been talking a lot about teen programs today and arts after school today. But when you all were teenagers, did you have access to art after schools? And do you think that their arts programs and art after schools and arts in schools are more or less accessible today?
I think they're the same as they were when I was a teen.
I think maybe a little bit better, at least in Boston. So if I think about the Arts Expansion Initiative, which has connected a lot of arts nonprofits in Boston to schools to create in-school opportunities as well as after-school opportunities, I think we could more visibly see those opportunities. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and we were just having a Michigan moment, East Lansing in the house. But, you know, I remember as a kid spending a lot of my time at the Detroit Institute of Arts, which is one of the most fabulous museums in the country, spending my weekends there. But there were cultural institutions like a place called My Heritage House, which really did a lot of artistic interpretation of Detroit's history, and in particular, African-American history in Detroit. And so it wasn't as easy to access as it might be through an arts expansion initiative where you've created and formalized some of those things. But I will say I had the advantage of a lot of caring adults who knew what I was interested in. Some of those adults were my teachers and folks in school. I remember my 8th grade teacher, Mr. Curry. So I'm really going to date myself here. So when the first Run DMC record came out, you know, Curry recognized that we kept bringing the tape to school, we kept bringing the album to school, and anywhere we could find a record player, we did it. We went up in the music room and we tried to recreate the album because guys played instruments and guys got on the mic or whatever. And so Curry said, you know, look, this is an opportunity for me to talk to these young people about what narrative is, what inference is, what poetry and a number of aspects of art are. But then as he kind of read into people's interests, some people wanted to produce, and so he hooked them up with resources outside of the school. When some of us started getting interested in comic books, Mr. Curry helped us write business plans because some of us wanted to draw, some of us wanted to get our work into stores. And so when you have adults who are pushing like that, it makes a difference. Part of what we want for every young person is a network of adults, even if you don't have the formal opportunities and partnerships, a network of adults who are paying attention to you and your passions and starting to make those connections across the city for you.
Yeah, I was saying earlier, I went to a pretty incredible high school. So we had a lot of opportunities and, you know, programs and all kinds of things for us to take advantage of. I think that some of the things that were lacking, though, in my school were programs that were geared a little bit more specifically to, say, like my heritage as a person who identifies as African American. So I had to seek out other opportunities outside of my school for that. I think the only thing I did might have been capoeira outside of school. But also, I'm from the South, so church is a really big thing. So a lot of our out-of-school programs were in church. And but I live in New York City now, so I also think that it's regional, you know, in Texas and Dallas, you know, you drive everywhere. If you don't have a car, you know, you can't really go to many places outside of your community, right, on a regular basis. But in New York, everybody take the train everywhere. So what I see in New York City, I see an abundance of out-of-school programs. And so, you know, I think that it's just a matter of getting that message to the students in the schools that these programs actually exist despite what they think, you know? Because out there, it's a lot of out-of-school programs.
I would say I grew up in California, Southern California, and I was always interested in the arts, but I didn't have art in high school, and I think I love to go to museums, but what I was always hungry for as a teenager was a community of people to kind of share that with, and I think that's a major benefit and a major thing that teen programs and museums can provide young people is this supportive community of different types of people who are like-minded. I was always very hungry for that and never found it until I came to work in museums and started working with young people. Like, these are my people. This is my community. I feel very fortunate that the ICA can provide that for these people, because I know I was so hungry for it as a youth.
I see that some of the after-school programs can be inaccessible to some of the kids because they're just expensive. So I grew up in the Soviet Russia, and the government paid for everything for youth. So I could do anything: ice skating, tennis, volleyball, arts. You have an idea, you want to try it out, you sign up, and you're good. So I think that expanded this kind of risk-taking and variety of many what people try to do and try to perceive in their future. Where here, sometimes I would ask my students and they say, no, it's too expensive, miss, I can't afford that. So, I feel that the funding and the government should definitely step up. I wonder if we need to chip in. I mean, there got to be some way of making sure that the kids have access to try out different things. And there is an urgency of, okay, you think you're good at this, you're trying to invest into it and you pay money, and then you try not to quit because it's so expensive, because if you quit and you're going to start from something else, you're going to be feeling really bad for the money that you spend. And so it's this element of capitalism, I have to throw it in there, that exists in the arts, in the after-school programs that are not free for some of the students, and depending on the communities that exist, that actually stop and prevent people to try something, or they're just not accessible. So.
If I can pick up on the access piece real quickly, I'm sorry to dominate. I think that there's a piece around social capital and some of the civic barriers to address as well. Just because the programming exists doesn't mean that young people feel like it belongs to them or they have an ownership stake in it. I meet a lot of young people around the city who, when we talk about opportunities and we say, there's an opportunity that's happening downtown, but you live in Mattapan or Roxbury, they say, well, why would I go downtown? You might go to Downtown Crossing, you might do a little shopping, but there's really kind of a barrier of perception and actually the legacy of Boston that I think prevents a lot of the connection to opportunity. It's not where kids from my neighborhood show up in the city. I don't feel like that's the place that I'm wanted in the city. And so there's some work that we have to do, I think, to talk about race, privilege, equity, in the city of Boston, really to figure out how we connect all young people to the best resources in the city.
I think, if I playing on that too, I think there's something like, if you listen to the group here, and even just listening to the young people presenting this morning, like, it's evidence of that kind of, sounds like to me that people sitting here have experienced what it's like to have a network of adults who've like radically listened to their interests, right? And have been like, oh, that's what you're interested in. Look, here's some opportunities. This is something that you should do and you can do, and I believe in you. And just hearing like what that did for each of us, like, gets us to sitting on this illustrious couch, right? But then thinking about the ways in which we as former young people, current young people, carry that forward, right? So I heard a lot of programs talking about, we go and work with other younger students, right? And so you're already building that network, right? So I think especially in teen programs, we've done a lot of really great work in sort of extending that network from like young people to younger people. But I think the flip side of it is we haven't necessarily done the work of extending it backwards up to adults, right? So thinking about those conversations about race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and who we are in spaces, and how we can take those conversations that we have amongst teen programs and flip them back onto museums to say, like, let's change the whole system of museums or of education to say, like, why are there predominantly white male directors? Why is it predominantly white women in education? Like, and let's use what we're doing with these networks that we've created, because you guys are creating those. I mean, we're creating them together, right? We've got teachers here, we've got policymakers, we've got people here who are all sort of like building this constellation to support this. And we're continuing to lift up young people, but then we've got to like I think we've got to like throw some over the wall. That's a bad metaphor. Don't go with that metaphor anymore. Help. But I think we've got to do something to like keep changing the dynamics of leadership above teen programs too. Sorry about that.
We'll help them up the stairs.
Yeah. Don't throw them over any walls.
Right.
Laura,
Right.
I will say that teen programs and museums are frequently, I'm biased because I work in teen programs, but teen programs and museums are frequently one of the spaces in museums where the most radical practices happen. And I think that museums overall, across audiences, through the staff, could learn from what's happening in that little, bell jar of teen programs and have it expand and make a much broader impact. And then outside the museum.
Yeah. And then the participants in the programs too are going to be the best ambassadors. You're going into your school and you're talking about your experience in these programs. You're really sharing some of the things that you do, the people that you meet, and that's definitely going to get other people interested or curious about what it might be like to be a part of a community like that. So I always think that that's really important to not hoard your experience in your museum programs.
So, just curious with this one, everyone in museum programs are like, this is the greatest thing that's happened to me. It's the best thing that I could have possibly done. This place is great. Everyone should come here. How come it's why do you guys think it's only a small percentage of teens who are involved in this? Because where I live, there's a ton more people who on my street could come here, but they don't. Just curious, why do you guys think not all teens gravitate towards this?
I feel like it takes a certain type of hunger and a certain type of knowledge, thirst for knowledge. If you are someone who's not very motivated, I feel like it's gonna be harder for you to find a place where you're able to express yourself creatively and do all that stuff. It might just that place for you might just be at your home, but if you're someone who's looking for something, actively looking for something, it's easier to find it. And for those people that could be in a program like this or in any type of program that aren't, I feel like they just are afraid of I feel like they're afraid of committing. They're afraid of there's several factors that it's probably different and personal for each person, but I feel like it's just probably afraid of commitment, afraid that they won't fit in. They're probably also afraid that they have to reinvent themselves again, we were talking about earlier. Some people see that as an opportunity, as a golden opportunity, as to reintroduce yourself, and then other people see it as something scary, oh, what if I reintroduce myself and then such and such doesn't like me, I don't know these people that well, they're just too worried about those kind of obstacles.
Yeah. That fear thing I think is big. The fear and the perception of museums and programs such these art programs. So for me, I would go into schools to actually talk to classes about the programs that we had at the Studio Museum. And one thing that I noticed was that, at first it was mostly girls who would be participating in the programs. But then when I started showing up to schools, and I'm, I think I'm a relatively, cool person, you know what I mean? And I'm a black man, so then they're like, oh, wait a second, you're a black man and you're young and you're working in a museum and you're doing art. That's interesting, that's new, that's different. I never saw myself in a space like that. So by seeing me, my presence, then it probably helped give people a little bit more confidence that they too could do it. So, so I think that fear and sort of dispelling these myths of what museums are is one way to help, bring people to the spaces.
I think that because the art itself can also be alienating too. So we're talking about like the people that you see, or the like even the architecture of museum spaces can kind of feel like, oh, you know, like, do I have to dress a certain way to go in there? And you know, maybe it'll say like $25 to get in, or that's a suggested donation. But if you don't get close enough to read the fine print, then you're gonna be like $25. I'm gonna go spend that somewhere else. Yeah. So there's something about like there are a lot of things sort of stacked against museums in terms of like, what does that art have to do with me? I don't see myself in the art. I don't see myself in the people who work there. I can't figure out where the entrance is because this architecture is too cutting edge. Like, do you go in that door or do you go in that door? And are they open ever? And so I think there's a lot of things that like, that fear, that kind of like paralysis of stepping into something new can be really hard. But it goes back to that point of like, you know, we are the best ambassadors for it, right? So like wearing it on our sleeves, like literally on t-shirts or like metaphorically in talking about it is like the best way, I think, to overcome that.
I think that there's still some imagination for the opportunity that has to be created among young people. Unfortunately, I still meet too many young people in the city of Boston who tell me, for instance, that they've never seen the Charles River. And so we're talking about 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. So if you haven't done that, then you don't have an imagination for the ICA. You don't have an imagination for Boston as probably the preeminent higher education city in America. There's a lot of opportunity that's outside of the scope of your imagination, and we need to figure out how to build that. Some of that also means that you have to figure out how to bring the opportunity closer to home. So if I'm reticent about coming to the seaport for the opportunity, how's the ICA going to meet me in Dorchester, where I live? And so we have to think about some of those connections as well. School is one of the conduits, but I think if you want to start to kind of replicate what is very special and what young people tell us is very engaging about the experience, don't meet them in some of the places where they're really disengaged.
No, and the simple fact that for students, the MBT does not provide free rides during the summer. Like, people would tell me, we have no money. So and if there is no ride, there is no access to anywhere else. So I think that also it's again, you know, the city to step up and recognize some of the opportunities that they can give the students, providing the rides to get to a job in the summer. So there wouldn't be a question, how come you're sitting at home? Oh, because I don't have money to go to a place like. So yeah, there are very strategic, simple things that I think can be added. Maybe community centers in our cities can have opportunities to advertise, talk about, invite artists to connect those museums and the places.
So now you all come from very different backgrounds. You have your own professions, and some of you work closely together, and some of you work in different parts of the country. But could you see your professions intertwining in some way?
100%. I mean, I think we have to. I think we have to work together because, you know, I mean, from my own experience working in museums and working with young people, it's a network. You know, they don't exist in isolation, and they have a life when they leave the museum, and all of you in different ways are a part of that. So I think we have to work as a network to expand the greatest possible success for the young people of the city and the country.
Collaboration is always key and important to moving any idea forward, moving a community forward. So, I mean, I think that it's always important to identify, you know, our strengths in the areas where we're not as strong, and then, you know, come together. You know, I'm learning a lot from folks on this panel, you know, just through the conversation that we're having right now, through the conversation that we had in the green room. And, you know, whenever I meet people, you know, I've met people yesterday or today, and we're already thinking about ways that we'll be able to work together, you know, whether I'm in Trinidad or, you know, Dallas, Boston, wherever, you know. So, I mean, but as far as the folks on here, like this is a clear example of that intertwine.
Synergy.
That synergy. Yeah.
We were just talking too about this idea of what happens when you tackle a problem from a different discipline lens. So this idea of like Eric's about to go off and to study either finance or IT or sales, and as an artist, sorry, I'm going to speak for you for a second, but like, what does that mean, right? And we were talking about, but that's the awesome thing, is when you can start to develop these different disciplinary languages, it's essentially like learning a whole other language, right? And so that we can all come to this table, this couch, these tables, and have this conversation about this idea of like, how do we support young people in this world, right? And do it from our different vantage points, and each build onto this idea, because we're each bringing like a slightly different language and a slightly different angle to that kind of like fits to make the whole thing more faceted and more interesting. So I think it's with all of us in the room, like bringing our own languages and our own, and I don't just mean that in terms of like the languages that you speak, but the languages of your being in the world, and like how you bring that to the conversation to lift it up even more. And I think that's what's so wonderful about having this time together, right? Is that we have this chance to listen to each other from across the country and be like, what's working here? What's working there? Whoa, that doesn't work with my people. Like, let me try it this way. And I think that's where it can kind of explode out into really, like who knows where it could go.
The collaboration is going to be, I think, key to scale and comprehensiveness. I mean, I think if we're going to do something beyond just a program here and a program there, we're going to have to create the common vision and the common resource to make it happen. And I think in Boston, it's got to be public and private resource to move it forward. There are certainly some limitations on the public resources to do some things, and I would also argue that for some of the breakthroughs that we need, for some of the risk that we need to take, public dollars don't do risk. So we need private partners who are willing to take the risk with us and to design with us, but we need public dollars to come back and institutionalize those opportunities as well, or at least do a significant amount of the cost sharing. I think in the collaboration, there also has to be a development of some shared voice and some shared articulation around the priorities. And so you raised issues around transportation, many of which are state level issues. So, we've got, I've been working with a group of folks really trying to think about what the student T-Pass looks like, and we sit across from the MBTA on a pretty regular basis, but that also includes some of our nonprofits like ACE, Alternatives for Community and Environment, as well. So we've got to figure out how to muster the collective voice, but we see the storm clouds on the horizon too. Because when I talk to the governor's team, if you even think about world events, Brexit killed the state budget. And I think people don't really understand that the gap in the state budget almost doubled because of Brexit. So that is going to impact cities, and that's going to impact Boston. But what I like to say about especially dollars for education, we need to use them in the right way, use as many of them as we have available in favor of our students. But however much money that is, it pales in comparison to the wealth of the city. And I want to tap more of the wealth of the city to dedicate to education and the kinds of opportunities that young people want.
Sweet. That's great.
Transition.
All right, so for our next question, we're really interested.
Do you hear that?
Oh, I guess it's time to play a game called Pick a Topic from a Hat, where our contestants will pick a topic from a hat. So on the table right here, we have a hat filled with like an assortment of topics. Like any of you guys can start by just picking a topic. I kind of don't remember how we wrote them. There's one words maybe. There's just something on a piece of paper. Whatever that thing says, just think about the discussion that we've had, the theme, and just continue the open discussion.
Okay. Teaching versus learning. Hey. Okay. Teaching versus learning. It's so merged for me, teaching versus learning. I don't know how much more I learn from my students than I teach them back. I think that focusing on learning more right now from my perspective and the students' perspective, I think that best teaching moments come when we learn from each other and we're open to know that adults know it all is maybe a false model, that sometimes we're experts in certain areas, but there are a lot of other perspectives we don't recognize because we also were kids and grew up in certain styles and atmosphere, and there are some things that we're blind to maybe sometimes. So yeah, this is like, it's really essential for me to know that we learn from each other. I have a student who taught me this whole idea of adultism. I've never thought of this that much before because I work for the students, and I don't think I'm an adult for the students. I think I'm a mentor. But this whole idea of how much we put our agenda on the people who can think for themselves is overbearing sometimes, and I know that. So it's really, really important for me to be aware of that learning process and to recognize that the other side know a lot more than we think they do, and give them a chance to actually help us learn as well.
I think this is one of the areas that teen programs can and should be promoting, the way in which we interact with young people, to schools and adults and pretty much anybody who will listen, is this idea of kind of co-learning together, and I've heard some people call it collegial pedagogy, but this idea of like, you know, I'm the professor on the panel, so I have to use like academic words. But this idea that we're really learning together, right? And we're like problem solving together. And exactly as you were saying, like, I have a particular set of expertise and you have a particular set of expertise. So let's meet halfway and solve this together. And I feel like in teen programs, it's one of the rare places that you see in the world where you can see that kind of like collegial conversation happening, where an adult will turn to a young person and be like, I don't know what the best solution is. Like, let's figure this out together. And, you know, I use that term sort of radical listening, but I really think it is. You know, the number of young people, like everybody here has said, who have come to me and said, like, no one's ever listened to me like that before. Or like, nobody's ever taken the time to hear. And I feel like that right there should be telling us something about the ways in which we're conceiving of teaching and learning as something that we're doing together. And then it's more about this like collegial building where we're problem solving together. And yeah, of course I have expertise in something, but so do you. So like, let's use both.
Can I respond to that, or we can all respond to that? Or do we need, oh no, I was just gonna say that because like one thing I hear a lot of people say, they're like, oh my God, I learned so much about myself, you know, in these kinds of programs where they'll say, you know, we don't learn this in school. So I think that one thing that is beautiful about these kinds of out of school programs is that I guess most of the educators who are in these, you know, programs, most of the time our approach is to like bring things out of you that already exist that sort of either lie dormant or that, you know, you just haven't, you know, things you may not have accessed yet. Mm-hmm. So I think that to me, that's sort of like my role is to help bring these things out of you that already exist versus me like teaching you or telling you something. You know, I can provide an opportunity, a space, you know, to help you discover some things for yourself. So
I wondered why it was teaching versus learning. Mm-hmm. Because great learning depends on great teaching. I think some of the schism in the school versus after school world is about who's a teacher and who's not a teacher, which I think is also a false dichotomy. And it's not to fail to acknowledge the training that our classroom teachers have gone through and their experience, but there's a wealth of experience that lives in our professionals and our experts from many walks of life. One of my favorite educators, and I think I want to write about this at some point, not just because it would be trendy to do so, is a guy named Prince Rogers Nelson. You guys know him as Prince, the artist, whatever you want to call him. But the last band that he put together, he found those band members on the internet. 3 young ladies, pretty young. And he said, look, I'm a master at my craft. It matters when you learn from masters at their craft. And he said, the relationship we're going to build is that I'm going to find young people who are hungry, who want to understand what it is I do. I can't just be an artist, I also have to be a teacher. But whenever he talked about this band, he talked about what he was learning. that's what you want every teacher starting to do. The other thing that I loved is that he put his reputation both as an artist and a teacher on the line, because he took young people who nobody knew, and he said, my commercial viability is dependent on your success as musicians. So if this record is garbage, none of us are making money. If this record is garbage, nobody cares what your names are. They care that Prince made a horrible record. But he was willing to put himself out there. And so there's something about that that I think I want anybody who's interested in teaching or in educating to understand. There's something that you deeply have to personally invest in whatever the enterprise is. There is great value to making sure that you learn from people in the real world, in the places where we create, in the places where we do our jobs. I love our science teachers in BPS. I'm not always convinced that they know what an engineer at Vertex does. So we need to make the connection. There's enough learning to go around, and no adult has the market cornered on how to teach. So we need to enable everybody to do it.
When I hear this conversation, I think two words come to mind. One is reciprocity. So this idea that there's equal weight coming from both parties in the learning and teaching. But also, I think both museums and schools are some of the most traditionally hierarchical institutions in our culture. And so it's thinking about removing that hierarchy and instead creating a different system of learning. And I think that's starting to happen in teen programs, maybe, yeah?
Definitely. Pick another topic.
Yeah,
Pick another topic from there?
Pick another topic.
Yeah, do it.
Oh, wow.
Get a good one.
Thank you. Mine says Donald Trump and student arts. No, it actually says contemporary art and teens.
I didn't remember right now.
Contemporary art and teens. I think the first thing that I think about is contemporary art is not contemporary without youth voice. And without youth perspective. And so, I think we define contemporary art as kind of art that's of its time or kind of looking forward. And anybody can make what might be considered contemporary, but I do think that it has to reflect youth culture in some ways to truly be contemporary and to truly be forward-looking. I do think that there is kind of a politic and chauvinism in art about what's high art and what's not. And so sometimes I think it means that we devalue the things that young people create in the process. I think if we ignore the politics of high art and what shows up in a gallery or a museum or whatever space, we'll get a more poignant lens into the mindset of the generation at that time. And if we give them the freedom to create, it's just going to add a lot of deep perspective and text to the social narrative.
Yeah, to that point, I think it's also up to us as the adults or the people who are running, certain programs or whatever, to remind the rest of the world where there is value, right? So, for example, at the Studio Museum, one of the teen programs, Expanding the Walls, the students they go through a whole regimen of workshops and different things, right? Ultimately, they have an exhibition of their own photographic work, alongside the work of James Van Der Zee, who is an iconic, photographer from, in Harlem. Or was, right? And their work is on view for an entire exhibition season. So, so that kind of can send a message to people like, hey, this is so important, that it's up for an entire exhibition season. Another thing that I was gonna say is that in working with ICA, teens for a week, I mean, when they made these presentations for these workshops that we were doing, I was thoroughly impressed. I was just really blown away by what they were able to accomplish in a matter of just a few hours. and the ideas that we're rolling and going through, and how they are really the ones who are shaping, how, people think about contemporary art. Aren't we always looking for the feedback of the youth? Like, we're all up here like, wanting to make sure that the young people, approve. So, right, I guess.
I have two thoughts. Well, one is, we say this here at the ICA, but I really do think it's true. Contemporary art is, very relevant to our time, our day. It's often, forward-thinking, pushing the boundaries, questioning what it means to exist in the world, challenging notions of identity. And I think someone said it in a presentation earlier, being sort of teens being on the cusp of childhood and adulthood. Hi museum, I'm looking at you. I think that contemporary art is often on the cusp as well, sort of looking forward. But one thing that I find really valuable with contemporary art is that because it's contemporary art and we're working with living artists, we have the opportunity to connect young people with living, practicing artists who are functioning in the world.
Young and hip and fun.
and to really be able to put them in conversation with these artists and have a really sort of reciprocal conversation together with young people and artists about, again, what it means to exist in the world.
Yeah, I feel like when I was in the programs here, that also made the experience very rich. Like getting to meet, we'd see the work in the gallery, or we'd do a bunch of research, and then the week of the installation, we'd go up to the gallery and we'd the artist would give us a tour, and then we'd do the artist interview. And I remember that was always a really good fun moment of the program, because it really made everything come to life, and you got to literally hear the exact explanation of what the person was going through when they were making whatever exhibition it is, and instead of just reading it, and I feel something that happens a lot with museums is there's a lot of language that's hard for youth to understand. So when you are reading a plaque on the wall, a lot of the time you there's a few words you might not understand, so you're just yeah, I get the gist of it. But when you're having a conversation with the artist face to face, they see that you're a teen. They're not going to try and use the most extensive words in their dictionary or their vocabulary.
Yeah, I want to say one more thing to add on to that. Now, I feel like a lot of professional artists who I have worked with, or who we've maybe invited to the museum or something. One thing that a lot of them say is that they almost more so appreciate the feedback or interpretations of that's kind of made by youth. People are really more interested in that authentic perspective, or voicing of that perspective, you know what I mean? So I don't know.
I look back at some of the events of last school year, and I know that my students create art all the time. One of our events, Poetry in the Park, we just brought the chairs, the snacks. We pretended there was a mic. There was no mic. It was right next to a Jamaica Plain train station. And we just started reading poetry. And there was a competition with adult teen poets. It was amazing. People were passing by, looking and not recognizing what's happening. It was not advertised. We just came to make some art. And I think this is one of my best memories, because it was in the neighborhood. It cost $100 for pizza and some juice and snack, and lots of love and love, and lots of art and poetry, and people impressed each other. People impressed people who had no idea what was going on. It was a group of women who were passing by, and they got to judge a couple of poems. They were so excited. It was completely unusual, but so easy to happen. And if I am to recall an event in my life, that's one of the events I will remember forever. And it's created by my students. And this is a fabric of my life, professional life, of the community, of their lives. And it was so easy.
That makes me think of, you work in a museum, you spend a lot of time talking about art history and learning about, artist salons, or like, oh, there's Basquiat hanging out with Andy Warhol, or like, the parties and the street performances. And every once in a while I have to stop and remind myself of like, and to look around and be like, wait, what is happening right now that people are going to be writing about in the future? Mm-hmm. And it makes me, and I always think about like the young people I work with and think about like, I wonder which of these young people are going to be the ones that are like, oh yeah, they were always hanging out, they were always, because that's how they talk about it in books, right? And in museum exhibits, like these artists were contemporaries. They went to school together. And they often went to museums together on the weekends, right? You can read that in the text panel when you go into a museum. So like look around yourselves and think about like which of your friends are going to be those people that like are making that kind of work that gets that I think it's so easy to think of like, oh, these people are over here, or like that history is way over there. But like we are those people, and it is that history right now. So like paying attention to it more and like giving it that sort of like acknowledgement of like, are we going to be looking back and be like, oh, in their young years, they hosted talk shows at the teen convenings, and now they're, like, how are we going to be thinking about like this moment in the past? And sometimes it's kind of fun to like pretend you're the future and look back at this moment in a way to like reimagine what you're doing in the moment.
Well, it looks like we have time for one more topic. So is anyone dying to pull that last topic from the hat?
Eric, come on.
Eric. Yeah, how about you?
Should I get up?
Yeah, we'll pass it down.
That was not that deep, y'all. Excuse me, I need to step again.
Testing?
Testing.
Oh, testing, haha. I was like, testing.
1, 2, 3.
I feel like it's weird, like even though I don't really enjoy going to school, I always am able to do very well on tests, even if they're not multiple choice. And I don't know what to give that credit to, but I don't know, testing is weird. Like, I feel like it goes back to like the traditional grading thing that most schools have, is like, it's just like a way to be like, to put your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions into numbers and then back into letters so that you can have a grade. And it's just like, I don't know, it's kind of weird, but I don't know, testing. Mic check, testing 1, 2. No.
Well, I feel like I have to refer back to Bea and Sienna. Where's Bea and Sienna? Bea and Sienna. Oh, they're up there. Bea and Sienna's presentation this morning, although it was a spoof, it was a parody, but there was the scene where there were young people and they had a grade on their forehead, and that's how they were being acknowledged. So I think, we clearly, testing needs to happen, but I think that it is too reductive many times, and important for young people to have spaces that don't have that.
Yeah. I had a professor in college who would, our tests would be, what do we call them? I can't remember what we called them, but they were verbal, so like he would pose a question, and, he might say, Tony, respond to, this, this is the question. And you'd have to speak on that. And then, at the end, he would be like, so then he would ask us what we thought that we deserved, based on our answer. So what do you think that you deserve? What grade do you think? And you'd be like, I think that was a kind of a B+ answer. And he'd be like, no, F- or something like, you know what I mean? That's but we were able to negotiate a grade, sometimes. But I liked his approach to testing. It was more conversational versus us writing down this right or wrong answer. So I started to sort of employ that in a lot of my classes, because it's different to hear somebody talk through a subject or a particular topic and understand their understanding of it. So yeah, looking at testing a little bit different.
I think in general, I'm not a fan of the form that testing has taken. I think basically what we want to try to figure out is how can we understand what young people know and how they can apply it. we just want to be able to see the demonstration of that. And the way that we do testing doesn't necessarily demonstrate that young people can use the things that they know. And it's why spaces like this and spaces like out of school time programs really do allow for that applied learning and for you to be able to demonstrate your ability. But I think, again, in a standards-based era for education, I think we have to figure out where's some of the middle ground on this. Where's the feedback that teachers need to improve what they do in the classroom? How can we have a faster loop on that? But how can we make sure that the knowledge is operable and integrated in some ways? The filling in the bubble doesn't necessarily do that. And I took a few parts of the PARCC test this year. Some parts were easier than others. A couple of parts whipped my behind. But I'm gonna study next year. But I also think that the superintendent and I talked about, well, what's the transcript of the future? What do we want to see that gives you a profile of that student's ability? And a lot of what we talk about is you may see the GPA, but you may see micro-credentials that say, this student has deep experience in design thinking. This student has exhibited leadership at these various levels. And so you start to get a more holistic picture. You also get an understanding of the life experiences that they've had. That matters as well, where they've contributed in the community. When I talk to college admissions advisors, they say to me, if you guys can figure out badging and micro-credentials, we'll stop looking at tests, because we don't think that tests and grades really tell us very much, because I don't know what the A at this high school means compared to the A at that high school. What I really want to understand is what that person's going to contribute to this campus when they come here. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I think that there are some opportunities and some ways that school needs to learn from the way that museum programs and other programs really assess the competency and the progress of young people.
I think the testing thing also reminds me of, back to this conversation I'm kind of harping on these days about how we think about who works in museum spaces, and maybe also who works in schools. We can extend it to that. But thinking about this idea of testing, right? Like, so yeah, in high school and in middle school and stuff, you're taking a certain kind of test, right? And we're all told that, like, once you're out of school, right, then tests stop. But tests then just take on a different form, right? So like, you've got your resume and you're putting that together, and in some ways that's like a test that you hand to your employer, right? And they're looking for certain things on that, right? So when you're saying that, I think this is a really important thing to think about, like, how can we figure out, like, as we're doing hiring and as we're trying to change the shape of museum staffing and school staffing, how can we stop looking for like an automatic, oh, that person has to have a master's degree in museum education? Granted, I would love for people to come to my program, but at the same time, like, what does it mean that you just happen to, be from the neighborhood and have worked as a community organizer for a long time, but maybe never actually went to college? And, like, how can we start to think about ways that this dependence on testing has infiltrated all of our thinking, so that maybe as we're thinking about hiring, as you guys start applying for jobs, that maybe this is something that you want to, like, start talking to your museum programmers now about, like, oh, like, let's say you wanted to hire me, I'm a recent high school graduate, who's been in your teen program. Just so you know, you wouldn't be able to hire me because your museum has like a master's degree only clause in a lot of its titles. And yet, those of you who are in teen programs right now probably would be really well prepared to be teen educators pretty quickly, like without necessarily having a degree in it. And so thinking about like how we can start those conversations now so that we can start changing who's leading these programs and who's leading, whether it's within schools or within museums, who's leading even higher up.
Sweet. I think I hear that noise.
Well, that's all the time we have for Topics in a Hat today. Now, audience, it's your turn to ask some questions. So if anyone would like to ask our panelist a question of theirs, you can raise your hand, stay seated, we'll have our mic runner come to you with the mic. How
How about you in the orange seat right there?
Orange seat. That's good.
Hi. Okay, now it works. Hi, everybody. I've been loving this conversation so much. It's like fantastic.
You're an awesome piece of audience because you're like so in it.
Yeah, I was like, yes, preach. I love it.
I noticed.
But I have a really big question. Like, I agree with most, like, all the things that we've been saying about how teens are represented, how we're heard, how I really feel the stereotype that we have as young people that we're not. I get a lot, you're not mature yet. You don't know what you're talking about. It's just a phase. I get that a lot. But, yeah, right, I know. But I think that's like the biggest barrier for us as teens to be able to be productive members of the community. Because as you know, you hear all the time, oh, I've never been listened to like this before. And that's true. That really empowers us and gives us strength to be more productive. But my question is, how do you, as Director of Education, how do you suggest we go about this problem? Because I want to be a social activist, but that's like for later, you know what I mean? Like, because I can't do anything now because I'm too young, but how can I, well, I know, but like that's a stereotype, you know what I mean? So I want to be able to know how can I empower other people? What's the best way for me to reach my teachers, my superiors, and make them not listen to me, but how can I make a change, a positive change, that I can give teens other opportunities to come and speak? What can I do? What can I do?
So just a couple of thoughts, and you might talk to these guys over here, because you guys are BPS students, right?
That's correct.
All right. I mean, talk about a demonstration of youth voice and youth power in the city. A lot of young people organized when they were fed up with the school budget this year. And I saw a lot of young people in a lot of places around the city, whether it was student walkouts, whether it was meetings that we co-designed with young people to talk about these issues. And so I think that there's, what I often tell people, young people and adults, especially with government, there may be the presumption that you need permission. You don't need permission. If there's a challenge that you want to take on, if there's something that's not working right for you, you've got the autonomy, you've got the agency to begin working on that and to begin organizing. I think oftentimes it's incumbent upon adults who've walked that road to kind of give some guidance, and we've had some adults across the community who've been able to do that as well. I think a couple of cautions that I would give. One, don't be afraid to speak the truth to adults. And that's at grand scale and that's at small scale. There are a lot of programs that I've been either a part of or have knowledge of or work with that claim to be youth-led. And when you're in them, they're not youth-led. And I think young people have to be able to say, let's check this. Let's establish some norm among ourselves and be able to sit at the table as equals with adults in some of those conversations, and at least make agreements on, what is youth-led going to mean in this organization, or what's the extent of youth agency in this organization. And you can make your own choices about whether that's the organization for you or not. I also think that young people need autonomous spaces where there isn't much adult presence. And a lot of that can be self-organized. I think that, adults always worry that young people aren't, they're into nefarious things and whatever you're doing on your own is not productive. But, that wasn't my experience as a young person. I became a would-be musician. I won't call myself a musician, but a would-be musician because other young people taught me. I didn't learn in school. I had other young people teach me to play instruments. I had other young people teach me to write music, but that was because we got together on my boy's front porch every day in the summer, and we started getting studio time for ourselves, and our parents didn't know what we were doing. But I think those autonomous spaces make a lot of difference. And sometimes it's just, we need space to say the things to one another to process our lives. Things that adults, they have a perspective on, but maybe can't identify with in a contemporary way. And even if they're in the room, they need to sit back and just listen and take it in.
But I'm sorry.
Go ahead, no, go.
For example, I'm an artist, a visual artist, and that's what I like to do. But I try to make like a change in my school by I wanted to make a mural this year. But for me to be able, I'm done with the mural, but I'm gonna like glue it up. But for me to be able to glue it up, I've been having to email like about so many people and get through so many levels of me to just get approved and approved and approved, and I haven't even been able to put it up yet. Like it's like not, even when I try and I'm done and I'm pushing for it, it's not happening.
So bureaucracy is real, and welcome to my world. There are a lot of things that I work on, and I know that other people in the school system and our young people work on that kind of require this chain of command. It will take a certain amount of patience, but not patience shouldn't translate into passivity. I think you have to maintain the urgency. Always think about the alternatives. What's another way to get this done as well? And figure out who the allies are that you're building along the way. There are adults who are paying attention to you now because you've emailed them several times. Change the conversation. Say, I don't want to just put in this request. I want you to ideate with me. I want you to help me think about another pathway to get this done.
I think it's hard, too, to think about, something I really struggle with is thinking about the long game of social change. And this idea that that's awesome what you're doing, right? And those emails are frustrating, and it's you're probably banging your head against a brick wall sometimes, right? Just listen to me. But I think that for me in those moments, I often, when I can do it, I try to remind myself that I'm not just by myself, and that you're part of a larger arc towards social change, right? So you're doing this right now so that in a couple years, the next young artist who comes to your school, she's only going to have to do 2 emails, or they're going to invite her to do it. But they're only going to do that because you've walked the talk and you've shown them that young people are capable of this, that they can write professional emails, that they can do this stuff. And so I think that's the really frustrating part of social change, right? Is that God, it'd be amazing if we could have instant gratification, right? Please, let us just all snap our fingers and have equity and a million, we could make our list right now and just wish it, but it's not gonna happen, right? But it's making sure that you have the networks to support you so that when you wanna give up, that people don't let you give up. And that you keep trying to find new ways. But I think really it's also about this idea of, people talk about this young people thing drives me up the wall. I'm all about the wall today. Drives me crazy because it's are you kidding me? What? Young people are totally fine, right? First of all, we were all young people. Second of all, it's totally cultural, right? So we've come up with this idea that young people are incapable of things. That's a cultural phenomenon. In other cultures, they have maybe you'll have a quinceañera and then you're an adult. Or maybe you'll have some kind of rite of a passage and then you're an adult. And then you have different responsibilities. In our culture, we don't, and I'm speaking broad American nebulous culture, we have this young people can't do anything because they're too wishy-washy. That's so wrong, right? And I think all we can do, in my opinion, for me, it's about Michelle Obama says, right? When they go low, you go high. So you're all right, you think that I can only do this? Watch me. And you're I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to be super professional. I'm going to make the mural. I'm going to contact the person. Oh, you don't want it in your school? I'm going to get it in City Hall. And just keep bringing your A game to be fine. If you're going to think that I'm, some wishy-washy, I can't make up my brain, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm a young person, then just prove them wrong. Because you're going to just waste energy trying to convince them. Adults, we're dense people.
And the murals and the value of education. It's not even on the mural is about education in general.
Dense. We're dense.
So I think unfortunately, we only have time for one more.
This gentleman right here with the hat.
The hat? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
This gentleman right there with the hat.
Is there a question in that hat?
Thank you. I don't know how to use a microphone, so all right. Hi y'all. Y'all are looking at me. So I have a question. Oh, that's what okay, so yeah, I'm breathing. So my question is, all of you had to work for somebody at some point, I'm guessing. You know, you don't just get to where you are just straight out the womb. You gotta build up to the place that you're in. So, and I'm guessing later on it's gonna continue. But my question is, everybody has different beliefs in terms of what they believe in, how they perceive things. They judge things very differently. You know, they get judged differently depending on who you are, where you're from. And my question for all of you is, how do you deal with working in like an environment, being in an environment where your beliefs and your judgment and how you're judged conflict with what your goals are?
What a nice question. Wow.
Boom.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna drop it. It seems expensive, but yeah.
Well, one thing I will say about that question is, you know, one of the things that working with so many different teens has taught me, and hopefully them as well, is that the people who are in the teen programs here at the ICA are such different people. Different people, different backgrounds, different ideas, different neighborhoods, different in every possible way. But, you know, what they do is try to understand each other and come to a community of support. So they may disagree, but they find ways to come together. And I've watched them on many occasions and tried to implement that in my adult life with my interactions with non-teens, adults, because I think that young people have a particular capacity to do that in a way that maybe us as adults have sort of separated ourselves from. So, you know, I mean, certainly the panel should answer that, but I would almost turn that back a little bit on some of the young people who are in the room, because I think many of these teen programs, that's what is so beautiful about them, among many other things, is that it brings together a group of people from very different backgrounds and beliefs to accomplish a common goal and to create a common community.
It's funny that you say that about that, like that observation, because it's the same way I've seen people really kind of go at it and then come up with something beautiful. Even at one of the groups, you know, from the residency that I was just telling you about earlier, they would say, well, you know, we're getting into it so much, but they created something so beautiful that I wouldn't have known that, you know, there was all these things that were going on behind the scenes. I personally have been fortunate to align myself with institutions and organizations that share, you know, similar mission. So I think that's been, even though within those situations, you know, those organizations and institutions, yes, there's conflict, you know, but it's figuring out how to really navigate those conflicts, when to push back, knowing when to push back, knowing when to, you know, just kind of like relax and say, okay, you got it. But I think one thing is what would help is aligning yourself with institutions, organizations, people who, you know, who share a similar mission.
Also, even in the most ideal situation, there's always going to be someone who has a different opinion or a different belief than you do at some point. Like, it's almost unavoidable. So like Gerald was saying, that you're gonna have to like know when to pick and choose your battles, and like and for some battles it's just really not worth it. So you just can let it go. Like for a majority of battles, it's really not worth it. But then for a lot of other ones that are really important to you, you should like make sure that you're like getting your point across and making sure that you're understood and respected in your workplace.
What an awesome question. It brought me back to my immigration process. Thinking of, you know, how do you adjust this? And I think in the profession and in college and school, changing cultures, it always helped me to believe that people have good intention. There is a lot of war and crap in the world. Sorry.
It's okay.
that we have to face every day. But I think if you have the seed of belief that, intentionally, this person may be having a bad day, but the intentions are good. We come to a meeting at school, and we all come from different backgrounds, different gender, different attitudes for education. And the first thing we've decided to condense, how people come together, and they come together with rules of how we communicate to each other. We came down to one. We assume good intentions. And I think it's so helpful. Like every time I come to a new place, of course, I'm thinking people will judge me. Open my mouth, there's an accent. There's before you get to actually explain yourself, there is always something that people create. But to myself, I think that good intentions. I'm just here. My intentions are definitely good. I'm responsible for my own intentions. And then I come to assume that I just need to, get over that little barrier, and then other people's intentions are also good. And I think that's been really helpful to me, and I've been talking to my students about that it's such a simple value, I guess, but it's such a bridge to walk on and be safe.
Yeah, I think for me it's that one, definitely. The assuming good intentions, I do a lot. I also try really hard to take the high road as best as I can, right? So to treat people with that, give them the benefit of the doubt, that kind of kindness, and just be hold myself to the integrity of the things that I believe in. And I think there's also something about it's a deep kind of care for other people too. So this idea of people are going to drive you nuts, right? Or you're going to have conflict, or you're going to have actual serious, I've worked in institutions that I did not align with the values. And so knowing when to step out of those, but also knowing that if I can maintain a sense of care towards that person or institution, that those are moments when I'm probably, there's that saying, right? That our greatest enemies are our greatest teachers. It's probably, in my life experience, has probably been the biggest case. The times that I've been most uncomfortable, the times that I've been most hurt by an institution, a person, a conflict, have been the times when I have grown and learned the most. I haven't liked it, but it's been, so if in that moment I can remind myself of that, then it helps me not be totally beaten by it.
I'm trying to figure out how to put together a coherent answer to the question, because the question is great. First of all, I think that I always remember that I'm a Detroiter.
I love Eminem, by the way, just so you know. It's my favorite. My favorite, it really is.
And the reason that I come back to that, I grew up in Detroit at a time where black folks had unprecedented political, economic, and social power. And so I think out of that experience, my first assumption is always personal agency. My first assumption is always self-efficacy. I don't have to suffer. I can choose to suffer. I don't have to suffer. And I also have to use that agency and service to others as well. So I don't want to see other folks suffer. I think when I've been in difficult situations, I've assumed that it was incumbent upon me to at least be vocal. And one example that I'll give, I'm a public policy researcher by training. And I worked for an organization in North Cambridge that I love dearly, but the organization was doing some research on youth violence in Boston and talking about the 90s trends with law enforcement. And I remember sitting in one of the seminars talking about the findings and the stories that they were telling about what youth violence looked like and what the law enforcement response was in Boston at the time. I was like, no, I was on the ground working in nonprofit organizations when this was happening, and this is not the entire story. And if we're purporting this to be a part of the solution set, then we're setting ourselves up. And so I wrote an email to the CEO and I said, I need time with you because I need to talk to you about this. And it's not that I'm walking in his door with a beret on and we're about to have a Black Panther moment or anything, but it was to say, look, here's my understanding of the research, but I also think that you need to do an ethnographic and anthropological take on this. You actually need to talk to the people who lived through this, because I don't think that they will tell you the story that the research is telling, and the data only tells us so much. And so Maybe that's a big act of agency, maybe it's a nebulous act of agency, but I assume that I've got to act at some level. I think you also have to have a self-reflective practice, because there are moments that things get uncomfortable for you, but you don't know how to name what you're uncomfortable with. And so I think if you're in the habit of kind of checking in with yourself and kind of understanding where you are, you can better have a perspective on what's going on. You can determine, as Eric said, is this a major battle, or is this not a major battle? Is this a matter of principle and my morals, or is this something more trivial than that? But it's almost a capacity that you have to build for yourself, and at the same time, you have to not be out there on your own. So in those troubling moments, you have to find the allies, whether they're inside that organization or outside the organization, because one, you need perspective. And you need perspective particularly when you're hurting, particularly when you feel like you're under assault. But you also need some folks who are going to help you through it. And I find in most cases there are those folks. And lastly, I'll say you need an open mind, because while I assume my own self-efficacy and my own agency, I also have to assume that I'm not right a lot of the time.
Great.
Thanks, y'all.
Great questions. I wish we could keep on talking, but unfortunately we are out of time. So I'd like to say thank you to everyone on our panel. It's been an honor to talk to you guys. Very happy for you guys to be here. Thank you guys so much.